Hey guys, welcome back to a new videos. Guys, we are reading chapter 3 and we're reading a book which is Napoleon Hill, The Golden Rule of Success. So if you want to see the past series, you can go on my channel and watch it. They're very interesting, and we're reading chapter 3 which is still too lengthy. It is covering more than 30 pages, so let's read it. I have often heard the expression, if I had my life to live over, I would live it differently. Personally, I could not truthfully say that I would change anything that has happened in my life if I were living it over. Not that I have made no mistakes, for indeed it seems to me that I have made more mistakes than the average man makes. But out of these mistakes has come an awakening that has brought me real happiness and abundant opportunity to help others find this much sought state of mind. I am convinced beyond room for doubt that there is a great lesson in every failure, and that so-called failure is absolutely necessary for worthwhile success can be attained. I'm convinced that a part of nature's plan is to throw obstacles in a mean man's pathway, and that the greatest part of one's education come not from books or teachers, but from constantly striving to overcome these obstacles. I believe that nature lays down obstacles in a man's pathway just as a trainer lays down rails and hurdles for a horse to jump over while being trained to pace. Today is my birthday. I shall celebrate it by doing my best to set down for the readers of this little brown covered messenger some of the lessons that my failures have taught me. Let us begin with my favorite topic, namely my belief that the only real happiness anyone ever experiences come from helping others to find happiness. It may be a coincidence that practically 25 of my 36 years were very unhappy years, and that I began to find happiness the very day I commenced helping people find it. But I do not believe so. I believe this is more than a coincidence. I believe that it is in strict accordance with the law of the universe. My experience has taught me that a man can no more sow a crop of grief and expect to reap a harvest of happiness than he could sow thistles and expect to reap a crop of wheat. Through many years of careful study and analysis, I have learned conclusively that what a man gives comes back to him increased many times, even down to the finest detail, whether a mere thought or an overact. From a material economic standpoint, one of the greatest truths I have learned is that it pays handsomely to render more service and better service that one is paid to render. For just as surely as this is done, it is but a question of time until one is paid for more than being actually does. This practice of throwing one's heart into every task, regardless of remuneration, will go further toward the achievement of material, monetary success than any other one thing I can mention. But this is hardly of less importance than the habit of forgiving and forgetting the wrongs our fellow men commit against us. The habit of striking back at those who anger us is a weakness that is bound to degrade and work to the detriment of all who practice it. I am convinced that no lesson which my life's experience has taught me has been more costly than the one I learned by internally exacting my pound of flesh and feeling it my duty to resent every insult and every injustice. I'm truly convinced that one of the greatest lessons a man can learn is that of self-control. One man never exercises any very great amount of influence over others until he first learns to exercise control over himself. It seems to me of particular significance when I stop and consider the most of the world's great leaders were men who were slow to anger, and the greatest of all the leaders down the ages who gave us the greatest philosophy the world has ever known, as it is laid down in the Golden Rule, was a man of tolerance and self-control. I am convinced that it is a grievous mistake for any person to start out with the belief that upon his shoulders rests the burden of reforming the world or of changing the natural order of human conduct. I believe that nature's own plans are working out quite rapidly, enough without the interference of those who would presume to try to rush nature or in any way divert her course. Such presumption leads only to argument, contention, and ill feelings. I have learned to my own satisfaction at least that the man who agitates and works up ill feeling between his fellow men for any cause whatsoever serves no real constructive purpose in life. It pays to boost and construct instead of knocking and tearing down. When I began the publication of this magazine, I commenced making use of this principle by devoting my time and ethereal pages to that which is constructive and overlooking that which is destructive. Nothing I have ever undertaken in all of my 36 years has proved as successful or brought me as real happiness as my work on this little magazine has done. Almost from the very day that the first edition went on the newsstands, Succeed has crowned my efforts in greater abundance than I had ever hoped for. Not necessarily monetary success, but the higher final success which is manifested in the happiness that this magazine has helped others to find. I have found from many and many years of experience that it is a sign of weakness if a man permits himself to be influenced against one of his fellow men on account of some remark made by an enemy or someone who is prejudiced. A man cannot truly claim to possess self-control or the ability to clearly until he learns to form opinions of his fellow men not from someone else's viewpoint but from actually knowledge. One of the most detrimental and destructive habits I have had to overcome has been that of allowing myself to be influenced against a person by someone who has biased or prejudiced. Another great mistake which I have learned by having made the same mistake over and over again is that it is a grievous mistake to slander one's fellow man, either with or without cause. I cannot recall any personal development I have gained from my mistakes that has given me as much real satisfaction as what I have experienced from the knowledge that I had to some extent learned to hold my tongue unless I could say something kind of my fellow man. I only learned to curb this natural human tendency of picking one's enemies to pieces after I began to understand the law of retaliation, through the operation of which a man is sure to reap what he sows, either by word of mouth or by action. I am by no means master of this evil, but I have at least made a fair start toward conquering it. My experience has taught me that most men are inherently honest, and that those whom we usually call dishonest are victims of circumstances over which they haven't full control. It has been a source of great benefit to me in editing this magazine to know that it is a naturally tendency of people to live up to the reputation their fellow men give them. I am convinced that every man should go through that biting through valuable experience of having been attacked by the newspaper and losing this fortune. at least once in his lifetime, and because it is when calamity overtakes a man that he learns who are his real friends. The friends stay by the ship while the woods make for cover. Have learned, among other interesting bits of knowledge of human nature, that a man can be very accurately judged by the character of people whom he attracts to. That old axiomatic phrase, birds of a feather flock together, is sound philosophy. Throughout the universe, this law of attraction, as it might be called, continuously attracts to certain centers, things of a like nature. A greater detective once told me that this law of attraction passes chief dependence in hunting down criminals and those charged with breaking the law. I have learned that the man who aspires to be a public servant must be prepared to sacrifice much and withstand abuse and circumstance without losing faith in or respect for his fellow men. It is rare indeed to find a man engaged in serving the people whose motives are not questioned by the average people whom his efforts benefit most. The greatest servant the world has ever known not only gave the ill will of many of the people of his time, an ill to which a great many of the present age have fallen here, but he lost his life in the bargain. They nailed him to a cross, pierced his side with a spear, eventually taunted him by spitting in his face while his life slowly ebbed away. He set us a mighty fine example to follow in his last words, which were something like, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." When I feel my blood rushing to my head in anger on account of the wrongs that my fellow men do me, I find comfort in the fortitude and the patience with which the great philosopher watched his torments, as they slowly put him to death for no offense whatsoever except that of trying to help his fellow men find happiness. My experience has taught me that the man who excuses the world of not giving him a chance to succeed in his chosen work, instead of pointing the accusing finger at himself, seldom finds his name in Who's Who. A chance to succeed is something every man must go out and create for himself. Without a certain degree of combativeness, a person is not apt to accomplish very much in this world for acquire anything that other people covet very highly. Without combativeness, a man can easily inherit poverty, misery, and failure. But if he gets a grip on the opposite to these, he must be prepared to contend for his rights, but not well that I said his rights. The only rights a man has are those that he creates for himself in return for service rendered. And it may not be a bad idea to remind ourselves that the nature of those rights will correspond exactly to the nature of the service rendered. My experience has taught me that a child can be burdened with no heavier a load nor visited with a greater curse than the which accompanies the indiscriminate use of health. A close analysis of history will show that most of the great servants of the public of humanity were people who arose from poverty. In my opinion, a real test of a man is to give him unlimited wealth and see what he will do with it. Wealth that takes away the incentive to engage in constructive, useful work is a curse to those who so use it. It is not poverty that a man needs to watch, it is wealth and then the power that wealth creates for good or for evil ends. Consider it very fortunate that I was born in poverty, while in my more mature years I have associated rather closely with men of wealth. Thus I had a very fair demonstration on the effect of these two widely separated positions. I know I shall not need to watch myself so very closely as long as the need for life's ordinary necessities confronts me. But if I should gain great wealth, it would be quite essential for me to see that this did not take away the desire to serve my fellow men. My experience has taught me that a normal person can accomplish anything possible of human accomplishment through the aid of human mind. The greatest thing the mind can do is to imagine. The so-called genius is merely a person who has created something definite in his mind through imagination and then transformed that picture into reality through bodily action. All this had a little more. I have learned that during these past 36 years, but the greatest thing I have learned is that old truth, which is philosopher all down the ages have told us. Happiness is not found in possessions, but in a useful service. That is a truth that can appreciate only after having discovered it for himself. There may be many ways through which I could find greater happiness than what I receive in return for the work I devote to the editing of this magazine, but frankly, I have not discovered it, nor do I expect to. The thing only I can think of that would bring me a greater measure of happiness than I already have be a larger number of people to serve through this little brown covered messenger of good cheer and enthusiasm. I believe the happiest moment of life I experienced a few weeks ago while I was making a small purchase in a store in Dallas, Texas. The young man who was waiting on me was a rather sociable, talkative, thinking type of young fellow. He told me all about what was going on in the store, a sort of behind the curtain visit as it were, and wound up by telling me that his store manager had made all of his people very happy that day by promising them a golden rule psychology and a subscription to Hiil's Golden Rule magazine with the store's compliments. No, he didn't know who I was. That interested me, naturally, so I asked him who this Napoleon Hiil was, about whom he had been talking. He looked at me with a quizzical expression on his face and replied, "You mean to say you never heard of Napoleon Hiil?" I convinced that the name did sound rather familiar, but I asked the young man what it that caused his store manager to give each of his employees a year's subscription to his Golden Rule, and he said, "Because 1 month's issue of it has converted on of the grocer's man, we have got into one of the best fellows in the store, and my boss said if it would do that, he wanted all of us to read it." It was not appeal to my existential side that made me happy. As I shook hands with the young man, I told him who I was, but to that deeper emotional side which is always touched in every human being when he finds that his work is bringing happiness to others. This is the sort of happiness that modifies the common human tendency toward selfishness and aids evolution in its work of separating the animal instincts from the human institution in human beings. I have always argued that a man should develop self-confidence and that he should be a self-advertisement. I'm going to prove that I practice what I preach on this subject by boldly asserting that if I had an audience as great as the one served by the Saturday Evening Post, which I could serve monthly through this little magazine, I could accomplish more inside of the next 5 years toward influencing the masses to deal with each other on the Golden Rule basis. than all the other newspaper and magazines combined have done in the last 10 years. So thanks for watching this video. This video is